Hi everybody, welcome to today's lesson on security and insecurity in POS 201 Introduction to Politics. As I mentioned in the previous lecture, have a little patience with me. I've been feeling a little under the weather, and so I may occasionally be coughing during this PowerPoint presentation. I do apologize for that. So when we look at issues of security, insecurity, and power politics, traditional realists have really traditionally taken a large role in driving how we think about security and international relations. According to traditional realists, we live in an anarchical system, which is very similar to the state of nature. And when we say the state of nature, we're talking about a situation that is where we have no civil structure, no authoritative ruler, no type of governance to speak of. And so it's a state of nature, is how human beings are naturally engaged with each other without in the absence of any kind of governance. And so, according to realists, it's a very dangerous state of affairs because without any kind of government to keep people in line, we have a situation where essentially it's a situation of war against all, where life is nasty, brutish, and short. And so realists really look at, as we've discussed in previous lessons, that they point to anarchy as really driving why we get warfare in the international system. Realists suggest that there is some level of order in the international system, but it is tenuous and uncertain. We might have balances of power, we might have moments of relative peace, but in reality, war can break out at any given moment. So, realists take on a mantra of peace through strength. Strength, of course, being related to military capacity. The more powerful your military, the safer you are likely to be as a nation. And of course, we've previously discussed realists that subscribe to the idea of balance of power. That the more balanced there is of power within a system, the more peaceful that system is likely to be. And the security dilemma, where in the efforts of one state to make it more peaceful by increasing its own power, inherently threatens the security of other states in the system, and then they all in turn try to increase their own power as well, which then leads to essentially a downward spiral of arms buildups, and essentially we really see a perpetual competitive struggle for security. States can only depend on themselves and their own resources, so there's a lot of self-reliance in the international system. If we look at the development of the international system from 1648 to World War II, we have what we would describe as a multipolar system. This means that significant power is distributed among three or more states in the international system. So we have a balance of power among at least three states in the international system. As we move after World War II, from about 1945 to about 1991, we have the Cold War. This is what we would describe as a bipolar system, which is to say that significant power is distributed among only two states in the system, specifically the United States and the Soviet Union. This was a relatively peaceful period of bipolarity. We didn't have major great power war during the period, although we did have a series of proxy wars in places like Vietnam, Afghanistan, and the Koreas. But essentially, this is relatively peaceful. We don't see great power conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union due to bipolarity and the threat of mutually assured destruction. Both states had nuclear weapons, and if one fired nukes against one, it could be assured that the other was going to fire nukes against it. Our current system is a unipolar system, which is one power. The United States is the single predominant power in the international system. Liberal institutionalists, on the other hand, challenge realism. They suggest that international organizations have helped to mitigate the effects of anarchy, and here they suggest that the United Nations is particularly important. The United States itself was created in 1945 to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations airing from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained. The United Nations currently has 192 member nations. It establishes the basic principles of order in support of international peace and security. Within the United Nations, we have a separate body which is called the Security Council. This consists of 5 permanent members, including the United Kingdom, the United States, Russia, France, and China. In reality, this is where the significant decisions of the United Nations get made, particularly with result to taking any kind of military action amongst the great powers. Each of these permanent members United Kingdom, United States, Russia, France, and China can veto excuse me, can veto any decision that gets made by the Security Council. Essentially, if the United States, United Kingdom, France, and China all agree that they want to take some kind of military action against another country, Russia can veto that measure. If Russia is not on board, no military action will take place. The Security Council reflects a belief that the United Nations as an institution would not work without recognizing that there are power politics involved, that the United Kingdom, United States, Russia, France, and China were the five most powerful countries in the world at the time, or among the five most powerful countries. And so the Security Council recognizes that without having the most powerful countries in the world on board with any kind of United Nations decisions, the institution was probably not going to work effectively. We also have 10 non-permanent members that are rotated into the Security Council for 2-year terms. There have been several criticisms of the Security Council. The first is that the Security Council reflects power dynamics of 65 years ago. The world has changed considerably. So, for example, it might not be the case that the United Kingdom and France should each have separate seats, but instead, perhaps we should see a common seat for the European Union instead. Another critique is that power is skewed toward the developed world and that the developing world really doesn't have much of a say on what's going on in the Security Council. However, reforming the Security Council would be very difficult. Extending veto power to more nations, so if we wanted to give veto power to even more nations, let's say we wanted to have 7 or 8 permanent members on the Security Council, you can imagine a situation where it would make it even more difficult for the Security Council to agree on any kind of action, because then any one of 8 member states could veto any actions instead of 5 as it currently stands. So the United Nations in general reflects a commitment to minimize international conflict. It has an optimistic vision of the ability to decrease the incidence of warfare. It's egalitarian to some extent. Its membership is open to all nations in the world. It has at its inception, it had a strong commitment to decolonization. It has a great interest in humanitarian affairs and in humanitarian concerns. To this extent, it embraces liberal ideals and a broader interpretation of security than realists typically have. It also is focused on environmental security concerns, health security concerns, food security concerns. So, to this extent, it's a slightly more liberal institution. On the other hand, the structure of the Security Council, as we have pointed out, clearly reflects realist power politics, as the most powerful nations in 1945 were given the ability to veto any kind of action by the Security Council. Switching gears a bit, we're going to examine the role of NATO in international affairs. NATO is an alliance that was formed in 1948, and its major role, it is a major power in shaping the global world order. To look at the development of NATO, we need to be aware that there was a lot of distrust between the Soviet Union, or Russia, and Western powers following the end of World War II in 1945. The Soviet Union, of course, is a communist power, whereas the Western powers were adhering to liberal capitalism. We had, immediately after World War II, the development of the Marshall Plan, where the United States developed a large-scale strategy for rebuilding Europe by essentially providing Europe with a great deal of funds to help it rebuild itself and its markets and to make communism less attractive. The United States at this point develops a strategy of containment against the Soviet Union in particular. The United States decides it will take a leading role to oppose the spread of communism in the world. So NATO was formed in essence to protect Western Europe militarily from the Soviet Union. It initially consisted of the United Kingdom, France, Denmark, Iceland, Italy, Norway, Portugal, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, the United States, and Canada. The Soviet Union responded in kind by forming its own similar version of NATO called the Warsaw Pact in 1955. It was similar to NATO, but it involved Eastern European states. NATO itself eventually expanded to include Greece, Turkey, West Germany, and Spain. France withdrew due to political disagreements, particularly with the United States in 1966. It was not fully reintegrated into NATO until 2009. In the post-Cold War world, obviously the primary reason why NATO came into being was as a counter against the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union obviously collapsed at the end of the Cold War. But NATO still presents itself as the North Atlantic's prime security organization that currently includes over 28 members. New members that have joined since the end of the Cold War from former communist states include the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Albania, and Croatia.